Disclosure: I was invited by the Tank Museum at Bovington and the Panzermuseum in the past. So recently I got a very interesting comment on my video about why no Western Allied StuGs. It has a similar theme like many other comments, namely that StuGs were only meant for defense and thus the Western Allied did not produce them. Yet it got quite hilarious when the commenter stated that I made up the term assault gun. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old. I hope. Let's take a look. The commenter, I call him M for simplicity's sakes, noted the following in the initial comment. Why would you want these things slowing you down when you're on the offensive? This is for taking a defensive position. So generally I reply to some comments, but since many times there is no response at all, I keep them often very simple. As such, I just responded, yeah, an assault gun is meant for defense. Of course, his claim that an assault gun like the Sturmgeschütze 3 would slow down the advance makes little sense to begin with. The Sturmgeschütze 3 had pretty much the same speed as the Panzer 3 or Panzer 4. I mean, it had the same chassis and engine as the Panzer 3. And in terms of weight, it was similar. I guess he was a bit triggered by my response and he brought up this gem of a comment. Calling this an assault gun is coming up with stuff out of thin air. Assault guns, real assault guns, are self-propelled artillery where they don't mind that they are big and can't be hidden easily because they are on the offensive and love having guns that are super huge. These are called tank destroyers because the Germans were on the defensive and needed things with small size that could hide from approaching tank columns while enough to knock them out from a distance because nobody wanted to sneak up on them with an equivalent of a bazooka or a grenade. I guess he never heard of anti-tank guns. Anyway, I mean, what coincidence this thing shows up when the Eastern Front went bad and the Russians are chasing them. When they can't build real tanks nearly fast enough and they needed something just to dig in and hold it down. Isn't that funny how this wasn't invented 2 years earlier when they were going all the way to Moscow with hardly any good opposition and had the gas pedal down to the floor? Well, where do we start here? Well, with the history, of course. In 1936, Manstein wrote a memo about the Sturmartillerie, assault artillery, which is part of the artillery arm that later on was responsible for the Sturmgeschütze. In the memo, it is particularly noted that although these vehicles will be similar to tanks on the technical side, yet on the tactical side they are quite different. It should be noted that Manstein did not use the term Sturmgeschütze assault gun in this memo, only Sturmartillerie. It is particularly noted that the job of the assault artillery is to support the infantry, not by leading but by following its attack closely to take out dangerous targets that hinder the infantry. He also notes that the assault artillery could also be motorized guns, not necessarily armored vehicles. Yet in the response of the German General Staff, also from 1936, the term Sturmgeschütze is used. I suspect that the term was also used earlier, but since I was born in 1980, I think this is enough to show you that I did not make up the term Sturmgeschütze. The full memo from Manstein and the answers from the General Staff are by the way printed in my StuG book. Note it's currently only available in German, but I'm working on a translation. Speaking of books, we currently have a sale for our books. If you enjoy deep research and insights on military history, check out our publishing house Military History Group. Currently, you can pick up all our books with up to 20% discount and a special 25% discount on our newest German book, The Mythos Stuka, written by my colleagues Dr. Roman Töppel, Dr. Jens Wehner and Christoph Bergs from Military Aviation History. It is the first book that completely tackles the prevailing popular memory of the Junkers 87 Stuka and provides new information in detail on accuracy, the famous siren, planes, track in air combat and kill claims by Hans Ulrich Rudel. If you're more into ground combat, the discount includes our other titles that deal mostly with tanks but also infantry tactics as well. Make sure you get yourself or a friend a copy until the 27th of October when the sale ends. Anyway, back to the comment. The idea that an assault gun must be super huge is an interesting thought. I mean, I think that would make a lot of sense in the Warhammer 40k universe, particularly for one faction. Where does this super huge notion come from? Well, I suspect that M knows about the British heavy assault tank Tortoise and or the T-28/T-95 US super heavy tank. Or in other words, for M an assault gun is only one if it's super heavy. Generally, as far as I know, military personnel in war does not like to be seen unless it is part of a ruse, specific situation, or tactic. Yet, let's address a few specific points in regards to his historical claims. I mean, what coincidence! This thing shows up when the Eastern Front went bad and the Russians are chasing them. And isn't that funny how this wasn't invented 2 years earlier when they were going all the way to Moscow with hardly any good opposition and had the gas pedal down to the floor? The first German StuGs went into service in 1940, and as mentioned, the idea dates back to peacetime, but since Panzers were prioritized, StuGs came later and initially in few numbers. Yes, the Sturmgeschütze was used as a tank destroyer, and particularly once it got the upgrade with the 75mm gun, but that upgrade was also done to the Panzer IV. In both cases, this happened in 1942. In 1942, when the Germans still conducted a summer offensive, namely Case Blue, which also led to the largest territorial extent of the German Reich in late 1942. These upgrades were also not because the Soviets started chasing the Germans. These upgrades were made since the Germans had a hard time dealing with the T-34 and KV tanks in 1941 when they fought from Poland to the gates of Moscow. And by the way, the Red Army provided quite a lot of opposition in 1941. This becomes apparent if one looks at German losses, but it also stated in German war diaries from the get-go that the opposition on the Eastern Front was quite different to the previous campaign. So his specific comment, isn't that funny how this wasn't invented 2 years earlier when they were going all the way to Moscow with hardly any good opposition and had the gas pedal down to the floor, makes zero sense. The StuG with the long gun was introduced in 1942. Removing 2 years here means 1940, at which point Germany was not at war with the Soviet Union. The Germans came closest to Moscow in winter 1941, so he implies the StuG was invented in 1943. And even if that was the case, the Germans in summer 1943 still mounted an offensive. Far smaller than before, but it was the largest tank battle in the Second World War, namely the Battle of Kursk. So let's look at some data here. So 25.7% at Kursk were Panzer IVs and 25% Panzer IIIs. Meanwhile, Sturmgeschütze and Sturmhaubitzen made up 19.9% of the armored fighting vehicles at Kursk. Now, considering that the Ferdinands and Sturmpanzers were also casemate tanks, so with no turrets, like the StuG, the number would be clearly above 20%. Also, as mentioned before, the StuG was not slower than the Panzers. Now, I answered that I actually published various important documents on the doctrine, development, and tactics of the Sturmgeschütze. My response might seem harsh to some of you, but for someone from Upper Austria and my generation, this was a very diplomatic response. To which he answered, so you have nothing to provide that contradicts my position that this is a defensive weapon and did not participate in assaults. The classification name being given means nothing since it never assaulted anybody. You probably should talk with the Russians about that. Anyone leading a spearhead in an offensive is not going to bring these, and they're limiting firing radius along. Their intention was defensive. They can call it anything they like. It will not change this. Now, this is a fascinating response for many reasons, but it also shows that his understanding of military matters seems to be lacking. Due to the Ukraine war, the term defensive weapon came up a lot in German debates, namely that only defensive weapons should be sent to Ukraine. Many people, particularly with military backgrounds, publicly stated that the term makes no sense. I generally was not so strongly opposed to that term, although I completely agree that it's a cheap excuse for politicians to use the term defensive weapon to deny something. Now, about the fact that the gun in a turret is preferable for an attack, yeah, that is the case, but it is not limited to the attack at all. You also want that in defense, if possible. In a report from October 1944 from a German minister that spoke to officers of the Panzer Army, it was noted that they prefer Panther and Tiger tanks with a turret. They noted that they are okay if the Panzer IV is replaced with Sturmgeschütze, yet they don't want Panthers and Tigers being converted to Sturmgeschütze. So the Jagdpanther and Jagdtiger. Since the turret is a particularly strength if one fights a large number of enemy tanks, which requires a quick change in targets. Turrets have benefits, and these are generally not limited to attack or defense. They might be more important in some situations, yes. And as mentioned in the original video, tanks with turrets are generally more expensive and production intensive. The German had plans for tank reserve with turrets as well, but these cost more. On top of that, the German army, like many others, was very focused on the offensive as well. This was not limited to the army, the Luftwaffe was very similar in that regard as well. To summarize, this video is a good illustration of how much effort one has to invest to disprove a comment that makes various ridiculous and in some cases outright wrong claims. For instance, me making up the term assault gun, or that it was invented only after Germany went on the defensive on the Eastern Front. Big thank you to my Patreon and subscriber supporters. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script. Thank you to the Tank Museum at Bovington and the Panzermuseum Munster for inviting me. Cheers and see you next time.